Welcome to our book chat. Well, our office book chat.
There we go.
Okay, let's call it our office book chat. We didn't really discuss what we're calling it, but today we're calling it our office book chat.
We're gonna figure out a name. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. So for now, welcome to our office book chat, where we're gonna discuss Throne of Glass, because I found out that Kaya here, my fellow realtor friend, is a Throne of Glass fan.
Yes.
Yes, well, ultimately a Sarah J. Maas fan, right?
That's where we connected, because originally she was like, oh, I'd seen it, and then she had made like a mention of starting the series because she liked the other series, very popular series.
Avatar.
There you go. Mm-hmm. She loves it. I haven't gotten there yet, but these are my babies, and this is where I started. But when we found out we liked the same thing, we're like, you know how readers are. We're like, oh, yeah.
I have a friend we can run and discuss this about.
So people don't get it. It's like shows,
I know. Like, anytime I finish a book, which is why I started, making reviews, I'm like, I have to talk about what just happened here, because I don't think people are understanding how much context is in these books and how much detail. And you're just like, oh my goodness, I just read 100 pages of absolute mind-blowingness. So that's how I've felt reading this book series. But the biggest concern, I feel like, is how do you read this book series? Because when I started and I was like, okay, I finished a court of Thorns and Roses. Get my brain together.
You got it.
I finished that series, and everyone's like, okay, the next thing you're going to do is start Throne of Glass. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm already thick into Sarah J. Maas. She's thoroughly impressed me. So, and people are saying that this was their favorite, all-time favorite. They'll bleed over this series. So I'm like, all right, cool.
See, well, I haven't obviously read The Court.
Yeah.
However, we'll see. But I really love these books. I read them predominantly in real time.
Right.
So my perception of how I feel like you should read it is different.
And that's the perspective we need, because I read it after all the hype. You know what I mean? These came out in 2014?
So a while.
Yeah. And to my knowledge, Sarah was like 18 or 16 or something writing these books. So the first 3 books I would say are very YA, like very young adult. If you're into romance, heavy romance and spice, you're not going to get that in pretty much the first 4 books.
Well, no, yes, it's not heavy on it, but I feel like it's more of an innocent way for her to be perceiving things, because things aren't as physical until it gets further on. But I do feel like there is angst and love and things inside of her stories.
Oh, yeah. There definitely is more romance than I had anticipated, because a lot of people were like, yeah, if you're a romance reader, this is not going to have that. But the whole of Throne of Glass book, the actual Throne of Glass book, is romance.
Yeah,
right. Opinion.
I'm like,
There's
come on.
No,
no spoilers, spice, but we'll get into that later.
Right.
Get into that later.
Yeah. How do you read this book? Because if we're going to talk about the timeline here, we've got Assassin's Blade, mm-hmm. and then we've got all of this timeline right here, and then we have the Queen of Shadows and Tower of Dawn.
Yes.
And those happen in the same timeline. So the big debate is, when do you start Assassin's Blade, and do you tandem read?
All right. So how do you feel about the order? Because you read it with Assassin's Blade at the beginning, correct?
I did.
Okay.
So I started it with a group of people, and they were like, let's read this together. And we're going based off of the deep history that they put into how to read this novel, right? These novels. So they're like, we're starting with Assassin's Blade. And I'm like, okay, cool. Now, I read for fun. This is not a job.
Right, same, obviously.
Our job is real estate, but I read for fun. And I like to enjoy how it's, how I like to get the thrill out of it, right? So I'm reading it, and I'm just like, I don't see how this book is any good. Just
when you read Assassin's Blade?
Yes. I was like, I get that there's some characters you might feel a little attached to throughout it, mm-hmm. without giving away any spoilers, but there was nothing really good going on. And then I also felt like the writing was just not very great.
See, okay, so I think that as far as the writing, because really this came later, so she had already had a good groove of the character by the time she wrote it. And I'm someone where I'm someone who really, really can't stand spoilers. I hate spoilers so much. And with that being said, when Assassin's Blade came out, I was kind of like, but I already know everything that's gonna potentially happen in this book, so I wasn't excited about it. It was more like I was just eating through it. But I do feel like if I could have started with that, then I would have cared more about, it's pretty much, where do you want the surprise to be?
I feel the same exact way, because some people will say, okay, this is a prequel, so if you're okay with reading it third, then you are going to be okay with pretty much knowing how the story plays out, right? But Assassin's Blade is 5 novellas, so it's just 5 short stories essentially, and it's just like depicting the origin story of Selena, who is, you know, the main character. She's this elite assassin, right? Also, maybe I just couldn't get past the fact that she was super young as an assassin.
Yeah.
And I understand Arabin got her, you know, when she was a baby, essentially. So he trained her to be an assassin really young anyway, but it was just like, okay, you are young. Like I can read how young you are. So it's just very hard for me to believe that you're this like super skilled assassin. And then at the end of every novella, you're like, girl, are you that skilled? Because I'm questioning how great you are at your job.
See, and I'm like, in Versus, and we're not going to get too deep into it, but Throne of Glass, you already know her skill set coming in.
Yes.
But it's spoken about Versus when you read Assassin's Blade, now you know.
Yeah, when you read Assassin's Blade, you're like, okay, you're saying she's really good, but I'm kind of getting a contradictory like opinion based off of the actions of the story, how the story's playing out. Whereas with Throne of Glass, you already know what it is, so you're just going based off of where it starts in that timeline. And for me, that's so much more interesting. I feel like if I would have just went and read Assassin's Blade third, I would have said, okay, this is just stuff I need to know about her. Maybe it's still not that great of a story, but it's just a good contextual stuff that I can say, all right, now I know a little bit more about her. Yeah. I know what she's went through to even get to the point where she's at today. So that, I feel like, for me personally, it's third. It's a third book.
Yeah, no, I mean, right. As long as you're okay with reading a book through with spoilers, because you will know most of the things from the, you know, you've gotten quite a bit of information prior to, you know, getting to that part of the story.
But then again, I also feel like you're getting a tad bit of a spoiler by finishing it first because of the way it ends. Now, if you've read this book series, you know how Assassin's Blade ends. So I was like, oh man, I almost wish I didn't know this.
So it's about where you want. I'm not trying to give out any spoilers. It's about where you want your surprise. You know,
you want
Star Wars. It's like people who watch them in a regular chronological order already know the big surprise that happens in Star Wars because they've seen all of it. Versus when you start at a 4, 5, 6,
right?
Then 1, 2, 3,
right?
So it's about how much more information you kind of want. But with that being said, I'm glad for it now because it just gives me more. But it's not about, like, at the time I was upset. That upset me, and Tower of Dawn upset me because I was ready for the last book, and I'm like, girl, like, why are you releasing other stuff? Like, that's my boy and everything.
Way, it's an upsetting book. I think we've come to the conclusion. Either way, it's an upsetting book.
Yes.
But you just got to get through it. Now, I will say, if you do start it first, be open-minded to how the progression of the series is, because when I first started it, I was going based off the hype of everybody. Now, you started it when the world didn't even know what this book was, so you were just starting straight up Throne of Glass. We already know that this is a completed, and most people say it's highly top rated, right? So I'm like going off that expectation. My expectations are extremely high. So I started this and I'm like, there's no way I just went from ACOTAR, which is beautifully written. The storyline is fantastic. And when you get into it, we will talk about that.
Okay.
To this. And I was like, ain't no way Sarah J. Maas just done gave me this when I just left this world. No. But then I had to keep going. And then I realized, okay, not the best book in the series, definitely some questionable things going on. But if we're going to look at the series as an entire whole,
yeah.
I mean, it is well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the series obviously is great. Mm-hmm. All we've got left
is this big sucker right here, nearly 1,000 pages, and I'm trying to not look at or read any spoilers.
But you know what? You're lucky because at least you're in a time where it's not like it just got released. You know, if you stay on the right side of like book talk, you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah,
but
I skim immediately past anything that has to do with Throne of Glass because I don't want to be spoiled. I don't want to get spoiled.
Which is impossible because people are low-key the worst. That's why we're trying our best to be informative without giving you too much.
Now, we giving it away.
Right. We will have stuff where we are going to give it away, but you will have ample notice and you will know, hey, sorry, spoiler.
Right. Now let's chat about the tandem read because we have Empire of Storms and then we have Tower of Dawn, and these happen in the same timeline. So everybody was like, read them together. I've seen a complete broken down chart on which chapters you should start reading, how you should finish it. And I even have a TikTok video on my opinion on where, if you're going to tandem read, where you should start and stop. Because we all are opinionated, right? So what do you think about that? Because I've got my thoughts.
So that choice wasn't available to me when I read it.
Right.
I read this because this is what was available to me. And then Tower of Dawn. And that is why I was so upset about, I was like, where is this? Where is this?
Yeah, right.
But great reads. I felt like I almost paused a little bit on Tower of Dawn because I felt like I just had, I don't know.
So much, yeah.
And I was a little fresh, but with that being said, I love it. Great book, you know, and it's fine, even though it's not, because sometimes I can get a little weird about changing the point of view, and, you know, she does that a lot in her books, you know, but I mean.
I think that's one of the reasons why the tandem read became such a trend, because of the outrage that people had, because the Empire Storms ends on, like, a huge cliffhanger. Like, you finish that book and you're like, there's no way I can't just go right into the next book. Like, I need to know what happens. So then you go to the next book and it's all about
has nothing
one
to do with what you were just,
that is completely removed from this story because they just like veered off into two different paths. I loved this book. Like, I loved
it was
Tower of
good.
Dawn.
It was good.
I loved it, but I also got to read it like right after. You know what I mean? So I was already like invested in that.
You're like, oh yay, I have more.
Chaos character. So I was already like, I can't wait to read his story.
No, because I'm so afraid of spoilers.
But the outrage. But see, here you go. This is why that things like the tandem read are.
But this
created.
is fine though. This is fine though, because even though it's happening at the same time, for my recommendation on this end of things, I guess if I had to go back and do it over,
yeah,
I'd probably I'd read these in the order, separately, not tandemly, and I'd go ahead and read this, and then read this. That's how I
think
read
I'm like
it.
a firm believer in how it's created. Like, Sarah J. Maas created it a certain way, and that's how she intended it to be read. So, and even if she didn't intend for it to be that way, that's just how it happened. So I feel like, coming from your experience, you reading it in real time, you didn't have these options. Now we have thrown around all these options like, this is how you're supposed to read this thing. It's like, well, what happens if you weren't able to read it like that?
Right. Like, this is the way you had to do it. I mean, and really, and obviously, big fan of hers, love her. Mm-hmm. But that's why this is Assassin's Blade. Back to this Assassin's Blade talk. It felt to me at the time like it was used to almost like be like setting up for the next book, as opposed to it really being a prequel. Was more like, why is this person important? Why is this person important? It's like, oh, here are all these people. Instead of us giving you a little blurb in the book about them, now they have a whole little area. There's some people in there, maybe they'll come back that I haven't seen yet, but we've got one book left, so we'll see. But, and with movies, books, everything, and why I like novels, I'm really big on character development.
Yes.
And with Assassin's Blade, because of her character development,
Yes.
she had to be written undeveloped.
You had to understand, like, I see the purpose of Assassin's Blade, and honestly the story wouldn't be the same without it, because you're right, it's completely about her character development, and a lot of other characters developments, which is why this book series I think is so great, because it's so many layers to it, whereas like a lot of stories, especially when it's in first person, you don't get all those funny details, you just get one storyline really, but this is like 6 storylines, like it's like 6 people's POVs, so it's a lot going on, but without this you wouldn't really get the full context of like where she ends up toward even, you know, toward the end book, you know, you don't get to see where she's completely transformed. So, and
because how, you know, Throne of Glass is, it starts off feeling like, okay, she's already needs to mature and do things like that in that book. So because of that, it makes you have to be like, okay, so this other one, she's got to be. So it was hard too, because I'm like, you're better than this. As I'm like reading some of the stuff that she's doing, I'm like, come on, like, girl. But I mean, she was a child too. But. And
I think that's too why I was like, ain't no way this is people's favorite book series. Like when you're on these 2 books, you're gonna read it and be like, I don't know the hype. Then you get here and you're like, oh wow, like the story trip. This is my favorite book. So
Which
far.
one is that one?
This one is Crown of Midnight.
Oh, Crown of Midnight.
Crown of Midnight, best book. Hands down. Best book. It was so good. It was like my jaw was on the floor at the end of this one.
I don't know. I feel like I can't commit to that. I have to. We're gonna be going through these again, and then at the end of the whole thing,
then
I'll say
you're like,
once
I
again.
Can't commit yet. But that was definitely one of my favorites.
I'm more of, I can tell you what I didn't like more so than what I was like, yeah, this is it. I'm like, wait, well, I know it's not on the list, you know?
We'll spin the block on that one,
right.
But for now.
Right.
But yeah, that's Throne of Glass. So stay tuned for when we finish this book series and we completely talk about everything, and come back for when we break down each book so we can give you spoilers, because we want to talk about them.
Absolutely.